The voice of a much-loved animated Disney character is dead at the age of 35. Daveigh Chase was a child star who scored big as the voice of Lilo in Disney's Lilo and Stitch.
She entered Hollywood as a child, at a time when most careers were still taking shape. By the age when others are learning their place in the world, Daveigh Chase was already etched into global pop culture as two opposing icons at once. The voice of innocence in Lilo and Stitch, and the embodiment of fear in The Ring. That rare duality turned her into a once-in-a-generation child star. But behind the awards, the billion-dollar box office footprint, and the instant recognition that followed her across continents, a very different story was unfolding, one marked by disappearance, legal turmoil, instability, and a final chapter that ended not in a spotlight, but in a hospital room in Los Angeles. Today, we'll unveil what really happened to Daveigh Chase. This is the heartbreaking truth behind the star of The Ring and Lilo and Stitch. Let's start from the very beginning. Child stardom and the unusual double peak. Daveigh Elizabeth Chase was born on July 24, 1990, in Las Vegas, Nevada, and raised between Nevada and Albany, Oregon, after her parents' separation. Long before Hollywood would define her identity, she was already being shaped by performance culture. She took dance training at age 3, participated in local talent shows across the Pacific Northwest, and did early vocal work that leaned heavily into country music. By the time she was 7, she was already doing national commercials, including work tied to Campbell's Soup. And within a year, she had stepped into television guest roles such as Sabrina the Teenage Witch. But much bigger things awaited here. The turning point arrived in 2001, a year that quietly positioned her at the center of two vastly different cinematic worlds. In Donnie Darko, she played Samantha Darko, the younger sister in a story that would later become a cult psychological landmark. Released with modest box office performance but eventual global cult status, the film placed her inside a narrative that blended teenage isolation, existential dread, and surreal time loops. In the same year, she became the English-language voice of Chihiro Ogino in Spirited Away, the Studio Ghibli masterpiece directed by Hayao Miyazaki. The film would go on to win the Academy Award for Best Animated Feature. Then, 2002 turned her into a cultural split-screen phenomenon. In just a matter of months, she voiced Lilo Pelikai in Lilo and Stitch, a Disney production that grossed over $273 million worldwide and became one of the studio's defining early 2000s hits. Lilo was not just another animated character. She was written as emotionally raw, socially isolated, and deeply human. And Chase's voice performance gave the character a fragile authenticity that critics repeatedly highlighted. In 2003, this performance earned her the Annie Award for Outstanding Voice Acting in an Animated Feature. At almost the exact same time, she appeared in The Ring as Samara Morgan, one of the most influential horror antagonists of the decade. Unlike Lilo, Samara was constructed through silence, distortion, and dread. A drowned child figure whose presence was defined by a cursed videotape and a 7-day countdown to death. The film itself was a major commercial success, earning over $249 million globally. But Chase's performance achieved something more enduring. It transformed Samara into a permanent visual icon of horror culture. In 2003, she won the MTV Movie Award for Best Villain, defeating established adult actors in a category that underscored just how unusual her position in Hollywood had become. A child actor recognized not for innocence, but for cinematic terror. By the end of 2002, this dual identity had effectively locked her into a rare category of child stardom, where artistic recognition and cultural imprint far exceeded her age or experience. Unlike traditional child actors who gradually transition through adolescence into adult roles, Chase's early career was defined by saturation, multiple globally recognized roles in different genres within a single 2-year window. She was no longer just a working child actress, but a reference point in animation, psychological cinema, and horror storytelling simultaneously. Awards and industry acknowledgement reinforced this perception. The Annie Award for Voice Performance validated her technical skill in animation, while the MTV Movie Award for Best Villain highlighted her impact on mainstream pop culture. These accolades framed her as someone who had reached peak visibility. This was before her teenage years. From child icon to dark teen roles. After the concentrated explosion of recognition between 2001 and 2003, her screen presence started migrating away from global blockbusters and toward television, supporting roles, and quieter productions. That transition became more visible in 2006, when she was cast as Rhonda Vollmer in Big Love, an HBO drama that ran until 2011 and explored the lives of a polygamist family in Utah. The series itself was anchored by Bill Paxton's character Bill Henriksen, but Rhonda Vollmer emerged as one of its most unsettling secondary figures. Introduced as a teenage girl within a rigid religious compound, Rhonda is written as manipulative, strategic, and emotionally detached, traits that contrast sharply with the innocence associated with Chase's earlier roles. Across multiple seasons, her character evolves into a figure shaped by survival rather than morality, navigating power structures within a closed community where control replaces stability and affection is transactional rather than genuine. What made Rhonda Vollmer particularly significant in Chase's career trajectory was not just the visibility of the HBO platform, but the tonal departure it represented. Instead of playing archetypes of childhood wonder or supernatural fear, she was now embedded in a narrative of psychological distortion and institutional control. Over the course of 53 episodes of Big Love, the series used Rhonda to explore themes of coercion, identity manipulation, and emotional weaponization. Critics frequently highlighted the character's chilling unpredictability, noting how Rhonda functioned less as a traditional antagonist and more as a product of her environment, shaped by a system that rewards obedience and punishes autonomy. While Big Love provided continuity, the broader film landscape offered less stability. In 2009, Chase revisited one of her earliest cinematic identities in S. Darko, a sequel to the cult psychological film Donnie Darko. The project centered on Samantha Darko as a young adult, attempting to expand the mythology of the original 2001 film. However, unlike its predecessor, which gained critical traction over time and developed a devoted following, S. Darko was met with overwhelmingly negative reviews. Critics pointed to its narrative inconsistency and tonal disconnect from the original, and it failed to achieve either box office strength or cult resurgence. And then she just disappeared. Fade from the industry. By 2012, Daveigh Chase's career had already entered a quieter phase, but what unfolded over the next 4 years was a steady evaporation from the visible machinery of Hollywood. After years of moving between television arcs and independent film roles, her presence in mainstream casting circuits became increasingly rare. During this period, her work was primarily anchored in independent cinema, where budgets were lower, production schedules shorter, and visibility significantly reduced compared to her early peak. One of the final clusters of roles came in 2015 and 2016, where she appeared in a series of low-budget thrillers and drama projects that did not achieve wide commercial release. These films included Killer Crush in 2015, followed by 2 2016 releases that would ultimately become her final recorded screen appearances, Jack Goes Home and American Romance. Both projects operated outside mainstream studio pipelines. Jack Goes Home, directed by Thomas Dekker, was a psychological horror drama that premiered on the festival circuit, featuring a fragmented narrative structure centered on grief, memory, and psychological breakdown. Chase's role existed within a broader ensemble cast, where the storytelling relied heavily on non-linear pacing and emotional ambiguity. Meanwhile, American Romance, directed by Zachary Adler, was a crime thriller that similarly occupied a niche space in independent distribution. Neither film translated into sustained industry momentum, nor did they generate the kind of commercial traction that typically reopens access to studio-level casting opportunities. Alongside these live-action roles, Chase's remaining credited work included voice performances in smaller, less commercially prominent projects. Unlike her early voice role in Disney's global release system, these later contributions were not tied to major franchises or widely distributed animated features. Instead, they existed within a fragmented production landscape where voice actors often move between short-term contracts, independent animation, and limited-release media projects. By the mid-2010s, she was largely absent from major casting announcements. In Hollywood, Visibility is often maintained not only through active roles, but through interviews, conventions, award circuits, and media engagements that sustain professional relevance between projects. Chase's absence from these systems became increasingly apparent. This period also coincided with a broader shift in how entertainment visibility was measured. By the early 2010s, social media presence had become a key indicator of public engagement for actors and performers. However, Chase did not maintain an active or verified digital footprint during this time, and there was no sustained online persona contributing to professional visibility. As casting ecosystems increasingly integrated digital presence into talent discovery and audience engagement, her absence from these platforms further reduced her exposure to new opportunities. Between 2014 and 2016, her industry footprint became increasingly difficult to trace through conventional entertainment reporting channels. Trade publications and casting updates that once referenced her work in television and film projects stopped featuring her in development announcements. This absence did not stem from a single defining event, but rather from a cumulative reduction in professional activity, representation, and public engagement. In industry terms, this is often described as visibility decay, a gradual fading from active casting ecosystems rather than an abrupt departure. By the end of 2016, after the release cycles of Jack Goes Home and American Romance, there were no further confirmed acting credits tied to major databases or production announcements. This marked the effective conclusion of her known screen career. Unlike actors who formally announce retirement or pivot into other entertainment roles, such as directing or producing, Chase's exit from film and television occurred without any formal declaration. Thus started her downward spiral. Legal troubles and public instability. Between 2017 and 2018, Daveigh Chase was no longer defined by acting credits or industry activity, but by a sequence of legal incidents that shifted how she was perceived in public discourse. These events did not emerge in isolation. Rather, they formed a compressed timeline that unfolded across roughly 18 months, beginning with a medical-related police inquiry in early 2017 and ending with misdemeanor substance-related charges in late 2018. The first widely reported incident occurred in February 2017 in Los Angeles. According to accounts cited in police and media reporting, Chase was detained and questioned by LAPD detectives after she was observed dropping off an unresponsive adult male at a local hospital. The individual was later pronounced dead, with early reporting indicating a suspected substance overdose as the cause. Importantly, Chase was not charged in connection with the death itself, and there is no public record establishing criminal liability in relation to the fatality. However, the incident became heavily referenced in later coverage because of its unusual circumstances. A former child actor linked, however indirectly, to an overdose death scene outside a hospital setting in one of the most scrutinized urban environments in the United States. Months later, in November 2017, a separate legal case brought her back into law enforcement visibility. She was arrested in Los Angeles County on a felony charge after being found riding as a passenger in a vehicle that had been reported stolen. Public reporting clarified a key detail. She was not alleged to be the driver or primary operator of the vehicle, but her presence in the car was sufficient to trigger felony-level charges at the time of arrest. The legal ambiguity of passenger involvement in stolen property cases often depends on jurisdictional interpretation, and in this instance, the case became part of a broader pattern of legal instability rather than a singular criminal narrative. Following this, the third major incident occurred in August 2018, when Chase was arrested again in the Los Angeles area. This time, it was a misdemeanor charge of possession of controlled substances. She spent a short period in custody in a local jail facility before being released on bail set at approximately $1,000. Unlike the earlier felony-level arrest, this case fell under lower-tier substance enforcement statutes, typically associated with personal use quantities rather than trafficking or distribution. By late 2018, additional misdemeanor charges were reported in connection with the earlier incidents. These included possession of a controlled substance without a valid prescription and possession of substance paraphernalia. In most cases, these charges were resolved at the misdemeanor level, with outcomes not escalating into long-term incarceration or high-profile trials. However, the cumulative effect of multiple legal encounters within a short period, created a consolidated public narrative that extended beyond individual case outcomes. Notably, these incidents occurred shortly after her final known acting roles in 2016, including Jack Goes Home and American Romance. With no major studio projects or public-facing industry work following that period, the legal timeline effectively replaced her professional timeline in media coverage. This was the phase where public identity began to shift. Prior to 2017, Chase was still largely referenced through her early work in films such as Lilo and Stitch and The Ring. After 2017, however, media framing changed, and it only got worse from here on. Illness, financial crisis, and death. By June 2026, the narrative surrounding Daveigh Chase had shifted fully into its final phase. In the months leading up to her hospitalization, multiple later accounts from acquaintances and tabloid reporting referenced unstable housing conditions in Los Angeles, including periods associated with Skid Row and surrounding downtown areas. These accounts also described intermittent homelessness and a lack of consistent shelter. Alongside this, narratives published after her death referenced alleged struggles with substance use and a widening separation from family support systems, including estrangement claims. The medical crisis reportedly culminated in admission to Los Angeles General Medical Center in early June 2026. At the time of hospitalization, she was described in multiple reports as suffering from severe malnutrition and significant weight loss prior to admission. Malnutrition at this level typically indicates prolonged inadequate intake of calories and nutrients, often compounded by underlying illness, social instability, or both. In her case, reporting suggests the condition had already reached a critical threshold by the time emergency care was initiated. Once admitted, her condition escalated quickly. Complications included a diagnosis of meningitis, a serious inflammation of the protective membranes surrounding the brain and spinal cord, often caused by bacterial or viral infection. This was followed by bloodstream infections, indicating systemic spread of infection beyond a localized site. The disease progressed rapidly. Sepsis, which is a life-threatening response to infection, was the final stage. The body's immune reaction at this stage begins damaging its own tissues and organs. Septic shock represents the most severe stage, where blood pressure drops dangerously and organ systems begin to fail despite medical intervention. During this same period, a GoFundMe campaign was launched by her boyfriend, Roy Hernandez, to assist with medical expenses and provide housing stability support during her critical illness. He emphasized both urgent healthcare costs and the need for a stable living environment during recovery. While financial details were not publicly verified, the existence of such a campaign strongly implied that out-of-pocket medical expenses and lack of sustained income had become significant pressures at the time of hospitalization. The campaign was launched while her condition was already critical. She died hours after it went live. It was June the 16th, 2026. Her death was reported at the age of 35, just 35. Media outlets, including those referencing TMZ-linked reporting, stated that she died from septic shock and organ failure caused by severe infections. In clinical progression terms, this represents the final stage of uncontrolled systemic infection, where multiple organs cease functioning despite intensive care measures. The speed of deterioration described in reports is consistent with aggressive bacterial infections, complicated by delayed treatment or weakened physiological condition. What distinguishes this final chapter from earlier phases of her life is the absence of public structure around it. Unlike her early career, which was documented through studios, awards, and film releases such as Lilo and Stitch and The Ring, this period is reconstructed primarily through hospital reports, fundraising pages, and posthumous media summaries. The transition from publicly visible figure to privately documented medical emergency marks a complete inversion of her earlier visibility. Following her death, there was an outpouring of tributes across social media, entertainment publications, and fan communities, many of which focused on the remarkably concentrated period of success she achieved between 2001 and 2002. Fans were quick to point out that few child actors have ever left such a broad cultural footprint in such a short span of time. However, another controversy erupted soon enough when Chase's former manager and longtime friend, John Ryan, publicly urged fans not to donate to the GoFundMe campaign created by Chase's boyfriend, Roy Hernandez. Speaking to media outlets, Ryan claimed that Chase's family was already handling funeral arrangements and that her estate had sufficient resources to cover cremation expenses, alleging that the fundraiser was not being used for any legitimate costs related to the actress. He further accused Hernandez of failing to properly inform family members about Chase's condition until after her death. Hernandez strongly rejected those accusations, telling TMZ that claims the fundraiser was illegitimate were 100% false. Whatever the case, in the days following the star's death, clips of Lilo, Samara, Chihiro, and Samantha Darko circulated widely online as fans revisited the performances that defined an entire generation of early 2000s moviegoers. Industry publications and former colleagues also reflected on the versatility that characterized Chase's career. Beyond the roles that made her famous as a child, tributes highlighted her performance as Rhonda Vollmer in Big Love, where she successfully transitioned into darker and more psychologically complex material during her teenage years. Others remembered her return as Samantha Darko in S. Darko, and her continued voice work throughout the Lilo and Stitch franchise long after the original film's release. For many observers, the loss was made more poignant by the contrast between the immense promise she displayed at such a young age and the personal struggles she faced later. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads. Also, don't miss this video you see on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.